Feels good to be here on a Tuesday night, folks. We started this show and we called it the Tuesday Night Hustle. And I had a fun little opening that I couldn't do because we changed our name to the Fantasy Football Hustle. But alas, we're filming this at night. So I can say officially, Dwayne, it's Tuesday night. The beers are cracked. And all across the fantasy universe, it is time to hustle. Welcome in, everybody. It is the Fantasy Football Hustle. We are proud members of the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast Network. I am Brian Drake, Drake Fantasy on Twitter, joined by the analytical assassin, the man with 1,000 jobs, Dwayne McFarland of EstablishTheRun.com, Matt Waldman, RSP.com, FootballGuys.com, and let me see if I can do it right this time, the film and data, the data and film analytics. I suck at that. I can't do it, Dwayne. What's the podcast you do with Jay Moyer?
RSP, Fantasy, Film, and Data.
I'm going to write it down one of these days. I swear to you.
It's okay. It's all right. I trip up on it sometimes whenever I'm hosting the show.
So welcome in, everybody. I tell you, this is the best hour of informative talk you're going to hear all week about fantasy football in Week 11. We've got 4 teams on bye: Packers, Giants, Seahawks, Titans. So we got to find some holes in our lineup to fill, and I think we're going to be able to do that. We're going to bounce around team to team. Dwayne's going to give us the information from his utilization reports, and we're going to find some players to get us to the promised land, man, because there's only 3 weeks left in the fantasy season, Dwayne, regular season, I should say. It's insane. Where the hell did the season go?
I don't know. I can't believe it. I feel like we just had week 1. This has gone by so fast.
Yeah, I can't get over it myself. And one of the things I can't get over is we had our first listener league on Fantasy Draft. Thank you to the guys at Fantasy Draft for hooking us up with that contest. We're going to do another one this week. And guess what, folks? This guy cashed right here. Maybe it helps because I'm hosting a cash game podcast called
Yeah, I need to come listen to you guys, apparently.
There you go. So we're going to do it again this week, and we want everyone to get over there to Fantasy Draft, download the app, use our promo code FFHustle, and that's going to get you in for a nice entry to their whole site. And if you're hating DFS because you don't like Rake, and what Rake is say you go into a contest and there's 10,000 people, right? And you put all this money in, you're playing $10. You would think, oh, hey, all these thousands of people, we're going to get all this money back. Not really. The companies take a percentage of that. It could be 10, 20, 30, who knows what it is. Week to week, contest to contest, but Fantasy Draft doesn't do that. All the money that goes in comes back out to the players and the winners. You should be all about it. We know we are here at the Fantasy Football Hustle, so check us out there, Fantasy Draft. We'll be talking about them as we go through the show. So let's kick things off. What a game we had last night, Dwayne, and it was between the 49ers and the Seahawks. So let's just start with the 49ers. Kittle was banged up. He's not there. Pettis, he's in the doghouse. We loved him in the preseason, but he can't be counted on anymore. Just drop him. And now that Emmanuel Sanders has this rib injury, it's Debo time. He is the man, it looks like, in this offense from a receiving perspective.
Yeah, played 84% of the snaps, last night. Ran a route on 88% of the dropbacks for the team. So 24% of the targets. So yeah, with Emmanuel Sanders going down, he was definitely, he was the guy. The thing that really surprised me, Drake, and I guess we shouldn't be surprised anymore, but it's just like Dante Pettis, it doesn't matter. That got him up. He got up to 51% of the drop of routes per drop back, but that was behind Kendrick Bourne, who was at 80%. So yeah, Dwelly was out there for 84%, of the routes per drop back. So similar, utilization as far as being out in a route. He was in Kittle's role, just didn't see quite the targets. He only had 11%, but he might get you by, in a pinch. If George Kittle misses a week again, it wouldn't surprise me if Dwelly, comes up, with just enough, to get you through a bye week, just based on the way that this offense runs.
Now let's go look at the backfield. My boy Matt Breida, who I curse his name every time I put him in a lineup, screwed me yet again. He went down with an ankle injury. Seems like that's a weekly occurrence. There's a lot of things in life you can count on: death, taxes, Matt Breida injuring his ankle. It's always happening. So he could miss some time. Enter Raheem Mostert. I like Mostert. He was a a guy who was like a preseason all-star. He bounced around a little bit. He was with the Eagles for a while. I think he's in line for easily 10 carries and a couple of targets. So if you're missing Derrick Henry or Chris Carson or Aaron Jones and you're just dying, Mostert could be a deep league flex option for sure. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've already seen it before this year. We've already seen the weeks where Mostert has come through. So yeah, I think Mostert is a guy that if Breida is going to be out, we know that they at least, they want to split the ball, between two guys, but typically they're using three, so don't be surprised though if Jeff Wilson gets back in the mix. Remember, Jeff Wilson is the guy early in the season that would get all of the carries down inside of the 5. I don't know if he'll continue to do that because that's really been Tevin Coleman's role, over the last few weeks, Drake. But yeah, if Breida's out, I think Mostert is, he's a viable, flex option, on a bye week.
Let's jump to the lead story here. If you're looking for a running back though, and that's going to be Brian Hill of the Atlanta Falcons. So everybody in Atlanta basically died. That's the story we can go with from week 10. Devonta Freeman, he's got a foot issue. He goes down. Enter Brian Hill, 22 touches. He gets Carolina this week, who is not the greatest against the run. So he's going to have a great opportunity. Is he the second coming of, Jamal Anderson and the Dirty Bird and all these guys? No, but he's on the field and he's getting a ton of opportunity in an offense that runs a lot of plays because they're always on the field because they're behind. What do you think of Brian Hill? If you've got money in Fab left, I'm all about this guy.
Yeah, I mean, with Ito Smith already headed to the IR, and anytime you hear the type of injury that Freeman's dealing with in the foot, we've talked about this before on the show with other players, Drake. It's like, we never trust that. It's like that's something that could linger on longer than a couple of weeks. The downside here is that this running game has just been terrible, all season. But to your point, he is a guy that, he's probably going to see the volume, because you've only got Kenyon Barner and then you've got the fullback Keith Smith. They'll do something else there. Who knows what they may do, who they may sign this week. We'll have to keep an eye on that. But for right now, yeah, Brian Hill seems to be the guy. He played 50% of the snaps last week with Freeman only playing 39% before he got injured. So he took on 59% of the rushing attempts where Barner only took on 3%. He ran a route on 24% of the dropbacks. So not utilized quite as much in the passing game. That is where they used Kenyon Barner, a little bit more. Not more than him, but they used him to supplement Hill. But yeah, I mean, you could do worse, I guess, Drake. I'm not expecting huge things from Hill, but I do expect the volume to be there. I would say he'll probably account for 70 to 75%, of the work from the backfield. And then, unless they bring in somebody else, like I said, we'll have to monitor.
If you're playing us on fantasy draft, Brian Hill, 10,200 this week. Well, another huge story in Atlanta, the number one tight end in fantasy went down. So Austin Hooper's injured. We don't know how long he's going to be out. He's a guy who was sucking up a little more than 7 targets a game. And over the last 4 weeks, he's the only Falcon with an end zone target, Dwayne. So, right. I mean, maybe we'll get a big Julio game. Let's hope. We're due for one of those. But it's Julio. It's Ridley. Now we got Brian Hill. The passing tree is shrinking here in the ATL.
Yeah, the bigger story here is really Calvin Ridley. So his routes per dropback this past week, Drake, 100%. So every time the Falcons dropped back to pass, Calvin Ridley was on the field. That's the first time we've seen that for any Falcons receiver all year. And they have a
guy named Julio Jones on their team.
Right. But the key thing here is the first week when Mohamed Sanu had left, we saw them continue to work Russell Gage in and Justin Hardy. So this past week, Russell Gage was still working in. He ran a route on 87% of the dropbacks, saw 14% of the targets, which was the same, as Calvin Ridley. But Justin Hardy didn't see the field at all from a standpoint of, passing, running routes. So that's good news for Ridley. If he can stay up in like the 95% range for his routes per dropback and he can be on the field even in 2 wide receiver sets, which he was this last weekend, as much as they have to throw the ball, like you talked about earlier, then Calvin Ridley is a guy that could produce for us, going down the stretch. He is actually second on the team. You mentioned earlier that Austin Hooper is the only guy with an end zone target over the last 3 weeks, and that's true. Calvin Ridley is actually he's in second place on the team for end zone targets this season with 5. That's 28% versus 39% for Austin Hooper. So Ridley's a guy that I'm looking to finally maybe pay off that 5th to 6th round draft equity that people had put into him earlier this season whenever they did their fantasy drafts.
And if you have a trade deadline coming up, I know Yahoo, a lot of them already passed, but I think ESPN might have another week or so left. Nice guy to try to buy low on. There's going to be opportunities.
Absolutely. I mean, he may be free in some of the shallower leagues. So I'm expecting, my gut would say that this offense will really run through Ridley and Julio for these next several games. I'm thinking Ridley's probably going to be in line for, 20-25% target share. Julio's probably going to be in line for 25 to 30%. Now, who knows? They haven't really designed this offense to go to those guys all season, so maybe they'll just keep running out these other spares. But it's like you said, the cupboard's bare. I don't know what else they'll continue to put out there. I mean, Hooper going down, he and Devonta Freeman together, because Freeman is 11% of the targets on the season, Drake. Austin Hooper, 17% of the targets. So Julio's at 21% and Ridley's at 15%. I would easily expect those guys to be around 25 and 20%, somewhere around there.
Let's go over to Seattle, where Tyler Lockett went down with a leg injury. If you're following the news all night long like I am, Pete Carroll's already saying he's optimistic about a recovery for Lockett. Although he was in a Bay Area hospital for swelling in his leg, they are on bye this week. If Lockett weren't to play, Dwayne, this now is a wide receiver group with Josh Gordon, David Moore, DK Metcalf, and then we'll get to our favorite tight end of the week after that. But if Tyler Lockett can't play, how does it spread out with these other three guys?
Yeah, it makes Josh Gordon, really worth owning again, is what it does. So, I mean, if you are the Tyler Lockett owner, you need to own Josh Gordon if possible. If you're in a mid-sized or shallow size league, where Gordon may have been dumped, he's a player that you would want to, put on your roster. It's going to be tough, like you said, with the bye week coming in. But yeah, I would expect Metcalf and Gordon, and then, Jacob Hollister, who I know you were alluding to as far as the tight end goes. Those are going to be the three guys. Hollister is a guy that I wrote about last week as a guy to keep your eye on for Establish the Run in the weekly utilization trends column that I do. And yeah, he came through huge this past weekend with 29% of the targets, Drake, played at 78% of the snaps, ran a route on 77% of the dropbacks. So that's Will Dissly-like, from earlier in the season. And this is a guy that trend has been building. So he had 80% of the snaps the week before, ran a route on 74% of the route, ran a route on 74% of the dropbacks the week before, while he had only had 14% of the targets. He had been trending in the right direction. DK Metcalf, with Tyler Lockett going down, saw 29% of the targets this past week. So he was clearly the next guy. And then you had Josh Gordon, who played on 37% of the snaps, and he ran a route on 50% of the dropbacks. So he was the next guy in line. So I would expect it to be Metcalf 1, and then Hollister and Gordon, they may flip-flop, but we'll have to see. And as far as, Pete Carroll goes, what is that guy not optimistic about?
Oh, absolutely. I was going to say that. He is like that all the time. This guy, he'll be back in the second half. Like, coach, he just had his leg amputated. Like, he's not coming back in. He'll be in. Don't worry. Give me some gum. We're good.
Yeah, let me chew that gum.
let me ask you a question here, because one of our great listeners hit me up on Twitter at Drake Fantasy, and he was asking me a couple of questions. He said, listen, Drake, I like referring myself in the third person like The Rock. So he goes, Drake, if I'm going to use my waiver claim and I've got number one in the league and I'm light at tight end, do I go for Jacob Hollister or do I pick up Brian Hill? Mind you, and I remind him of this, the Seahawks are on bye this week. So you're going to have to pick up another tight end also, or roll with whatever, crap tight end you have out there right now. What would you do in that situation? You got the number one claim. Are you picking up Hill? Are you picking up Hollister?
Yeah, I mean, if it's a situation where, I'm really super weak at tight end, that might get me to go Hollister. But honestly, things change, so much, Drake. And my gut tells me that most of the Seattle offense is going to run through. I think Josh Gordon is eventually going to be the guy that's probably going to see more than Hollister. I could be wrong about that, but that's what my gut says. And so I would lean more towards Brian Hill, trying to get as much mileage as I can out of the next 2 weeks. Plus, it's like you said, I mean, we're going into week 11 and week 12. You're just trying to make it into your fantasy playoffs. So in that particular case, I'm definitely going to lean to the player that I know I get to use this next week.
There are going to be guys coming up in the fantasy playoffs who we're not even talking about right now they're so off the radar, and they're going to be starting as studs in the fantasy playoffs. Keep it rolling here with the Cleveland Browns picking up a win over the weekend against the Buffalo Bills. And it's kind of the squeaky wheel getting the grease, and it's Odell Beckham, 12 targets. That was a season high for Beckham. They really tried to get the ball to him, Dwayne, and it looked like the Cleveland offense, against a really good Bills defense, figured it out. And maybe more of that is what we're going to talk about next with the running backs, but your thoughts on this passing Browns offense?
I still don't like it. I don't know what they may or may not have figured out. Jarvis Landry's trending in the right direction, 12 PPR, 17, 25 over the last 3 weeks, but Odell Beckham's just stuck 10, 13, and 11. Despite, them, obviously they're on the field for almost every snap. They're always out there, on passing downs. Like you said, Beckham, they tried to get it to him this weekend with 32%, of the targets, 24% to Jarvis Landry, but they just, they're just not, this is one of those deals, Drake, where the utilization and everything is there, but they're not clicking. He and Baker Mayfield, they're just not on the same page. The offense has no rhythm to it. It just feels, I don't know, everything about that offense, when you watch it, there's just no continuity to it, and it's not like they're setting things up. It's like they're just running plays. So I'm still out, on the passing offense. Beckham, Drake, he's only got 4 end zone targets all year. That's insane. But and that's 20% of what the team has. So yeah, as far as the passing game goes, Jarvis Landry, is, he's a fine wide receiver 3, but really that's all Odell Beckham Jr. is, at this point right now, right? I mean, he's your wide receiver 3 and you hope that he has upside and he somehow comes through, with a big play. And he could get it going. Odell Beckham Jr. is still an elite talent, but this offense just seems to have a lot of problems.
I would never want to play Odell Beckham if I had him. I would be worried that I'm going to get 2 for 13 out of him every week. But one thing they have figured out maybe is this running game, because it's the dreaded week that all Nick Chubb owners feared. Here comes Kareem Hunt, and he played, and he played a lot, and they played together, which I know Dwayne wants to talk about, because there's some real interesting things that came out of these two guys getting on the field together.
Yeah, absolutely. If you just look at it, 81% of the snaps for Chubb and 55%, for Hunt. So you immediately know that there were overlap between the two guys. And really the way they used them, Chubb was still the primary ball carrier. So he saw 77% of the attempts. 6 of those came inside, the 5-yard line.
Well, there was 8 plays in a row. They tried to give me the ball.
It was
banging my head into the television.
I know. And they kept running a toss play down by the goal line. It's like, what?
Freddie Kitchens the worst.
He really might be. And then Hunt, so Hunt only had 15%, of the attempts, but his target share, Drake, 24% of the targets. What's interesting, though, he ran a route on 56% of the team's dropbacks. Chubb ran a route on 61% of the team's dropbacks, that's his highest mark in 3 weeks. Chubb still saw 8% of the targets, where he saw 12% the week before. So even though Kareem Hunt got on the field, Nick Chubb was still really, Nick Chubb's game didn't change. Now, can that carry on? I don't know. They did have a little bit of success offensively, so maybe that's something that they'll continue to do, since they've not had a tight end, which I don't know, Drake, when they get back David Njoku. I haven't gone to look, but, I think he's due to return here, potentially at some point. But with Chubb and Hunt, what I see is, it's another playmaker to get the ball to. You've got Landry, you've got Beckham, but they haven't really had a tight end. So Hunt's kind of filling that role is what it looks like, based on what I'm seeing here.
We always talk about, 11 and 12 personnel. This is 20 and 21 personnel. So they ran 20 or 21 personnel 43% of the time. The NFL average, Dwayne, is 9.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And another little fun stat, Chubb gained 113 of his 116 on 11 carries with Kareem Hunt on the field. So interesting stuff in Cleveland. More interesting down in Tampa Bay, home of the next WrestleMania. I'm sure you're very excited about that. O.J. Howard, finally, he broke out. It was the game you could circle on the calendar. They were playing against the Arizona Cardinals, who can't stop the tight end. And here comes O.J. Howard on the field. And lo and behold, he had a good game.
Yeah, played 99% of the snaps.
Wow.
Ran a route on 70. The bigger number is this: running a route on 75%, of the dropbacks. He had been stuck down in that 60% range, which, it's just you're not involved in enough of the plays. So, his target share was still only 13%. You definitely would like to see that get up around 17, 20%, but he saw 2 targets in the end zone. Drake, he has 3 of those now on the year. He accounted for 15% of the team's air yards. His average depth of target was a 10, and he operated from the slot quite a bit more this week than what he had in the past. He saw the slot for 37% of his routes. So it does appear that coming out of, last week, they did decide, with getting him back, he had been out for the previous 2 weeks, actually with injury. They made a concerted effort to try to make him a little bit more part of the game plan. He's still clearly behind. Chris Godwin was at 23%, and then, Mike Evans was at 13% of the targets, whereas, Evans had been at 28 and 36% for the last 2 weeks. And so I think what we're seeing here, Drake, we've talked about this before, is every 3 to 4 weeks, you'll see these things turn over, because what film are the opposing defenses when they're preparing? What are they watching? They're watching the previous 3 to 4 weeks of film. So Mike Evans has been the lead guy for the last 3 to 4 weeks. Well, people have already seen what Chris Godwin did early in the season. So there is an opportunity here for OJ Howard, if the coaching staff can figure out a way to use him, because they do have offensive line issues still. And so that's the thing that gets him, is he gets stuck having to stay back to block. So if he can get out of that, there is an opportunity here. I do think he's worth, adding in a league if you've got issues at tight end, because he's probably been dropped, in most of them, except for the deeper leagues. So I think he is worth owning. The other guy that I do expect to continue to see trend up over the next couple of weeks is probably Chris Godwin, just because everybody's going to pay so much attention to Mike Evans.
In the backfield, Ronald Jones ran the ball 11 times for 29 yards. It's pretty much what we expect from him. But the big story, Dwayne, 8 catches for 77 yards. I saw some great tweets out there like this, I think, tied or beat the amount of receptions he had in like high school and college combined. It was something idiotic like that, but wow.
17% of the targets ran a route, season high, 42% of the dropbacks. Agambuwale is still involved, but his routes per dropback has slowly dropped over the last 3 weeks, 31, 23, 24%. So, and a lot of it, I think, is just due to the close game script, that Ronald Jones, when he was out there, they just didn't opt to pull him off the field, on a lot of those passing downs. So, he did a nice job. I wish that we would have seen him continue to get the rushing attempts. The week before, we had seen him get 69% of the rushing attempts and only 15% for Peyton Barber. This last week, that evened out at 42% and 42%. And the big problem for Ronald Jones is this, and you really need him to get the receptions now, because he gets nothing inside the 5, Drake.
Right.
Peyton Barber came up and, got him again. So Barber has 4 carries inside the 5 over the last 3 weeks. Agambuwale has 2, and Ronald Jones has 0. Ronald Jones only has 2 inside the 5 all year. Part of that, is the Bucs just don't have that many trips inside the 5. But when they do get down there, they're giving it to Barber. They're giving it to Agambuwale. So Jones really needs these receptions to continue if he's going to be in a true timeshare as far as the attempts go.
Is Peyton Barber worth having on your bench? I'm in a big 12-team league with 6-man benches, right? And Peyton Barber's on the waiver wire, but nobody thinks anything of this guy.
Yeah, he's not a guy that I'm going to prioritize at this point, just because we know that the staff wants to go to Jones, and they don't have a good record. I don't know what the incentive is to really play Peyton Barber, that much at this point. I think, the coaching staff respects Peyton Barber. I think they know that he's a guy that is just good enough to get the job done. And he can do some nice things, but I think they really want to see what they have in Ronald Jones. So I think the only way that we see Peyton Barber in an expanded role is if Ronald Jones gets hurt, or if he just, all of a sudden just started fumbling the ball. If he had 2 or 3 fumbles in a game, that might do it. But outside of that, I just think, the die has been cast. It's time to see what Ronald Jones has.
Just updating an earlier thing we talked about, the earliest Njoku could return is week 12.
Okay.
So we'll see what happens there. All right, folks, we appreciate you joining us here. If you're on Facebook, if you're on YouTube, Periscope, we appreciate it. I want you to like our page. If you're listening to the podcast, be it on iTunes or Google or Stitcher, wherever you find us, like us, review us, rate us. We really appreciate it. It helps our cause immensely. Okay, Arizona Cardinals. I traded away Kenyon Drake. I said, David Johnson's coming back. Drake's going to go to the Pine, not going to be needed. I couldn't have been more wrong. David Johnson looks like he's running in cement shoes. There's nothing healthy about this guy. They probably should shut him down. Did I write this down? 5 rushes for 2 yards and 1 for 8 receiving.
Yeah, he had 2 PPR points. So it sounds about right. He played 43% of the snaps, whereas Drake played 64%. Johnson, basically they sat him down. Late in the third quarter, he had a fumble. He didn't see the field again. At that point, it was pretty much all Kenyon Drake. So Drake led with, 64% of the snaps, 56% of the rushing attempts, and he ran a route on 50% of the dropbacks. I think you hit it on the head. Both things. He looks like he's running in cement. There were a couple of clips that were out on Twitter. I don't know if folks probably saw him today. It literally looked like an old man running. He's just hurt. Because we saw him be productive earlier in the season, and he's not a super fast guy. So when you watch him versus a guy like Kenyon Drake, they're 2 very different runners in the way that they go about achieving their goals and the way they go about doing their job. So David Johnson's still a guy that is going to be worth owning, I think. But I'm with you. I'm not so sure that they shouldn't just totally let him get well. And who knows, they may have done that had Chase Edmonds been healthy. But you got Chase Edmonds, who we don't know when he's going to be back. He still hasn't practiced yet. Yeah. So he's got a hamstring issue. But if you have Kenyon Drake, he's a guy that you just have to watch the practice reports. this week, by the end of the week last week, they said David Johnson was fine. I want to say he practiced in full on Friday and was taken off the injury report. But earlier in the week, he had limited sessions. So we'll just have to keep an eye on it again this week. But Drake looks really good in the offense. He's a guy that they can get the ball to in space, out of the backfield. And that's an area where David Johnson's a great receiver, but Drake just has a little bit more pop. When he catches that ball, he's got another gear that Johnson just doesn't have right now. So he saw 17% of the targets and 14% of the targets over the last 2 weeks. Now, only 10 fantasy points this last week because, sharing time with David Johnson obviously brought him down some. But I think he's probably still going to be in line for flex as long as Chase Edmonds does not, come back. Once that happens, we'll have to step back and see who knows what's going to happen. It could be a 3-way committee at that point. That's something that we've seen Cliff Kingsbury do in the past at Texas Tech multiple years, where he used 3 different running backs for 3 different types of roles. We could definitely see that occur too.
I was super excited to talk to you about the wide receivers for the Cardinals, and I realized they play San Francisco this week. But our boy Christian Kirk exploded on the scene. 10 targets, 6 receptions for $138 and 3 touchdowns. I was at the bar with my buddy Sinclair, who owns Christian Kirk and started him, and you would have thought like it was his bar mitzvah or something, the way this guy was jumping around the place. Really nice to see from Christian Kirk. He is the most explosive element of this offense on the outside. Larry Fitzgerald still went 8 for 8 for 71. First talk about Kirk, and then your boy. We had another sighting, and his snaps are doubling Dwain. Andy Isabella. It's happening.
Maybe. But let's.
I'm adding him off the waiver wire. It better happen. Please, God.
Let's start with Kirk. I don't know what else to really say about the guy. He's in the 3 weeks that he's been back, his snaps and his routes are all great. I don't need to, belabor all of that again. He's pretty much on the field all the time, but he's led the team in targets all 3 of those weeks, 29%, 21%, and 20%. He's led the team in air yards 2 of 3 of those weeks. And here's the key with him, Drake, what they've been doing these last 2 weeks. He only had 16% of his routes come from the slot this past week, 19% the week before. So they've been moving him outside. He's not just playing inside. So now it's Larry Fitzgerald playing inside, and then Pharaoh Cooper, along with a little bit of Andy Isabella sprinkled in, along with Christian Kirk also rotating inside a little bit. Those other 2, though, really Pharaoh Cooper, almost all of his routes are coming from the slot. So Kirk is working more outside now, and they're pushing him vertically down the field. So his average depth of target this last week, Drake, 18 yards. Wow. In week 8, he had a 12.2. Those 2 average depth of targets, those are his 2 highest marks of the season. So his role since coming back has also changed a little bit. And so working further down the field, that makes his targets now more valuable. And it does seem to be something where he and Kyler Murray they're just clicking at this point. So if you own Christian Kirk, you should be pretty excited, because this is a guy that down the stretch, He's going to see a lot of targets. Like you said, he's going to have a tough matchup, but I still feel good about him. He is the number one. Larry Fitzgerald over the last 3 weeks, not only have his targets, been at 12, 17, and 18%, they also seem to be just, not playing him quite as much, Drake. He said in 2 of these weeks, he's only gotten to right around 80% of the snaps. His routes per drop back are hanging down around 85%. So it's like they're pulling Larry off of the field, a little bit. That might be just to protect him, with age, it's just a veteran guy. The Cardinals are pretty much out of things now at this point after losing this past weekend. But it's something where I think we'll continue to see the young guys. Now, Andy Isabella, that's kind of the perfect segue to him, as the season goes. Yeah, he's gone from over the last 2 weeks, 21% of the snaps to 39% of the snaps. His routes per drop back have gone from 36 to 39%. He's still not getting a lot of targets, only 4% and 7%. But the thing I like about him, Drake, is we know that he can hit big plays. And so I think if he can continue to work, he can continue to show, those things in practice, et cetera, et cetera. I think this is a guy that, if you're in a deeper league, I've definitely been rostering, Isabella, anywhere that I can, just because of the volume of this offense. Drake, this offense ran a 2.7 plays per minute last week. That's insane. I haven't looked. That might be the highest for any team this year. They ran 64 plays. That's despite, losing the time of possession battle. They still ran that many plays. So this is an offense that likes to run, a lot of plays. They do have issues with time of possession, but yeah, Isabella could end up being the other guy that starts to work inside the slot more. Amari Cooper is a guy that they do like, but that's the guy that Isabella's really battling right now. And their 2 spots have flipped over the last 2 weeks, Drake. So Isabella has moved ahead of Amari Cooper at this point as far as playing time.
Just a heads up on the Cardinals' schedule going forward. You get San Francisco this week, then a bye, then you get Jalen Ramsey and the Rams, and then the Steelers. So not exactly the greatest next few games for Christian Kirk. But again, he's a talented guy, and they're throwing the ball a ton. In Kansas City, the biggest BS you will hear of the week. LaShawn McCoy was rested. Let me get the air quotes in there for the videos. Rested this week as they prepare him for the playoff push. That's a load of crap. LaShawn McCoy is shot. They're putting him on ice because, frankly, he's not that good anymore. Damian Williams took over this game, 19 for 77 on the ground, 5 for 32 through the air, and the other guys really just didn't do a whole lot. Dwayne, my favorite Darrell Williams didn't do a whole lot, but I think he's a guy who needs to be rostered in super deep leagues because if something happens to Damian Williams, I think Darrell is ahead of LaShawn McCoy.
Yeah, he may be. I don't know. I mean, it's tough to say. I mean, Reed said that this is a day that they had it planned. What I'm going to say is McCoy looked really good in the beginning of the season. Mm-hmm. Over these last few games, he had looked his age. It just didn't. So I don't know. He could have been battling an injury that we don't know about. Who knows? But to your point, you look at the last 2 weeks, as far as the snaps, 73% and 73% both weeks for Damian Williams, 67% and 76%. So even in the week that LaShawn McCoy did play, Damian Williams has already had a 73% snap week and a 67% of the rushing attempts week. So this past week, he bumped that up to 76% of the attempts. His routes per drop back, 53 and 54%. Half of Patrick Mahomes' drop backs is good enough whenever you're dealing with Patrick Mahomes. So yeah, Damian Williams is in a nice spot, heading down the stretch. He's a guy that I definitely, am happy where I do own him. Right. I don't own him a ton, Drake, because I didn't buy at his draft price the season. And I'm so thankful that I didn't, but on the few teams where I do own him or he got dropped in a couple of leagues and I grabbed him then in those situations, I am happy. He also has a week 12 bye coming up. He's got a plus matchup though this weekend against the Chargers, and then he comes back and he gets Oakland after the bye week. Then it gets a little tougher. He's got New England and Denver and Chicago later down the stretch, but he's got 2 nice games coming up after his bye week.
Damian Williams, $12,100 on Fantasy Draft if you want to get in the contest that Dwayne and I are going to be putting out there. And we say that because we love our listeners. We love our sponsor, Fantasy Draft. We appreciate them coming on board. And DFS is a tough game. A lot of people put money out there. They go, oh, I'm going to win big. I'm going to win this $1 million. You know what? You're probably not. let's be real, okay? You're putting money out there that you're kind of just pissing away. I would hope you listen to guys like Dwayne and I, and then my podcast, I do Eat the Chalk. Search it out on iTunes, wherever you find your favorite podcast. But we want you to come over to Fantasy Draft, play rake-free DFS with us. I'm going to tweet the link out. Dwayne will tweet it out so somebody actually sees it, and you're going to come play against us. Hey, I cashed. Top 5 guys made money. I was one of them, pal. Dwayne, how much money did you win this week on Fantasy Draft?
I won $0, Drake.
So we want you to come on board, use our promo code FF Hustle, and we're going to have a lot of fun filling that.
Pretty good too. Like I like the way their salaries were set up. Like, man, I squeezed some major studs in there, but just some of the guys that I stuck in the lineup, that I expected to have, a little bit more, they just didn't. David Montgomery, some guys like that, they just crapped the bed.
There you go. I forgot who the hell I even played.
You did. Hey, Drake, we got to go back. Did you trade David Montgomery for Amari Cooper? Tell me you didn't.
No.
Thank you.
I had my trade deadline here. So my big fantasy league, the Alcoholic Haze, that's all my old frat buddies from college. So I'm texting Dwayne Saturday night. It's the trade deadline. One of my friends, happy Veterans Day, belated to Jim Hartman, United States Army, was at the Old Dominion concert here in Syracuse. I don't even know what Old Dominion is. I thought it's just like a mid-major basketball school, but apparently they're a country band. So he's at this concert and he sends me this trade offer of David Montgomery and Marvin Jones for my Amari Cooper and I think Devontae Parker. My running backs suck. Like I have like Sony Michel, Matt Breida, and Chubb. That's it. So I'm thinking, I got to do this. Cooper's schedule is brutal, by the way, down the stretch. Go look up Amari Cooper's schedule. It's insane. It's murderer's row of corners. But he had it there. I'm looking at my lineup, and this has happened to everybody in fantasy football. You go to accept the trade, and you go, what the hell is it? The guy pulled it. He pulled the offer. And I send back to him, and he's like, driving home. Can't text. Hit you later. 12 o'clock goes by. Sorry, man. Me and the wife were in the car. I'm like, you son of a... You took that down on purpose and you wouldn't put it back up.
You should be glad you didn't do it.
I am now, I guess.
Yeah, dude. Amari, I would much rather own Amari. He's the best player in the deal. I'm not that worried about Detroit. New England is a tough matchup, but Buffalo, Tre'Davious White does not travel most of the time, so they can keep Amari away from him. And that's actually a +4 matchup, as far as PPR goes. Chicago's an even matchup. The Rams, yeah. But that's week 15. I mean, so
with this team, I won't be playing week 15.
You might, but then you get, week 16, if you are playing in week 16, that's the Eagles. Then you got, the Redskins week 17. Hopefully most of your leagues are done, by that point. So when I look at the schedule, it's not as bad as, I thought. The New England one is the toughest one because they have tough corners on both sides, and then Ramsey will definitely track Cooper. The good thing about Amari Cooper though, and we just touch on this quickly and we can move on. He's not just a jump ball guy. He's not, just a guy that, he's a speed guy. I mean, the guy just, we've been talking about him for 2 years straight, because I had done all the research on him for an article I did for Matt Waldman last year. I mean, the guy just separates. And I mean, he'll give Jalen Ramsey all he can handle. I mean, this is a guy that can run every route in the book. He can attack every single area of the field. And, he and Dak, man, they are dialed in, Drake. I mean, those two guys, they're definitely on the same page. So, Amari Cooper, is top guy, right now. And I love owning him, even with the schedule.
Hashtag top guys. It's a shout out to you wrestling fans out there. You know what I'm talking about. Let's stay in the NFC East and quickly just give me your thoughts on Darius Geis, because he's going to be coming back off the IR. We don't know if he's going to split time totally with Adrian Peterson, but we know that Callahan wants to run the rock. And here comes this young stud out of LSU who we assume can run the ball, the 5 minutes a year he's healthy. What do you think of this guy? If he's on your wire, worth a pickup and stash?
Yeah, I think he's worth it. It all depends on your roster construction. We talk about that, those words a lot. But if it's something where, you've got excess, depth at the receiver position, you feel you don't need something, you could drop it, to pick up, guys, and you're a little weaker at runner. Yeah, I don't mind doing it. I'm definitely afraid of putting him in my lineup this next week. I think we need to see a week. I have no clue if they're just going to try to ease him back in. What will their plan be? I mean, the Redskins season is over. So, I mean, you could see a scenario where they're like, let's just see what this guy can do But on the flip side, they could very much be, more of the mindset of, you know what, we'll see what we have in guys, but we're not going to overexpose him, because the last thing we want to do is get him hurt again, and then we're dealing with him having an injury heading into next year. I don't know where the coaching staff is going to fall on that line of thinking. There's really no way of predicting it. But I will say Adrian Peterson has been just good enough that they could allow them to just really make it a platoon between the two guys. And if that's the case, that's, I don't really want to own a piece of that. You're never going to start it, not with the Redskins. Hell, I mean, we talked about this all the time. Yeah, we talked about this, in our last episode, right, Drake? We talked about, hey, Adrian Peterson is literally playing, above expectations of what everyone thought, and you still don't even want to start him. And he scored 12 and 14 PPR points in his last two games in week 8 and week 9. But that complete dud of that 3-pointer could be coming at any point in this offense.
If you're in a really, really deep league and he comes back, just keep an eye the next few weeks on Chris Thompson. Wouldn't be the worst guy to stash on your bench. They're going to throw the ball a ton, maybe a bunch of dump offs. Just saying, keep it out there. A guy I mentioned in passing very similarly to Chris Thompson a few weeks ago, Darius Slayton for the Giants. 14 targets, 10 receptions for 121 and 2 touchdowns. Obviously, there was no Sterling Shepard. There's no Evan Ingram. They're on bye this coming week. Maybe somebody who isn't as highly prioritized on the wire because of that bye, Dwayne. Is he worth spending a few bones on to put on your roster?
Yeah, I mean, it's starting to sound more and more, who knows if Sterling Shepard's going to play, this year. If Shepard does, it's going to kill Slayton. But Slayton is the guy that's getting the deeper, looks, he's getting the higher leverage, targets. He's got 4 targets in the end zone over the last 3 weeks, which leads the team, Drake. He's got 59% of the air yards this last week. I mean, Golden Tate had a good game too. Golden Tate had 18% of the targets. Darius Slayton had 35% of the targets this last week, whereas the 2 weeks before, 12%, 7%. So it was really, it was more of a funnel situation. All you had were Slayton and Tate. And the opposition was obviously doing things to bottle up Saquon. They were not going to let Barkley beat them in the passing game or in the running game. With Evan Ingram out, it was really just down to Slayton and Tate. And that was the game plan for the Jets, was really to say, hey, those receivers they're not going to beat us. Daniel Jones can't beat us with those receivers. And they came through. So with Slayton, I would expect, he's a guy that I would be willing to put some, free agency dollars on. It is tougher because, like you said, you're heading into a bye week with him. But if you can probably get him for a little bit cheaper because of that. But it's got to be a situation where you're not hurting this week. Don't do it if you need a win and there's another player that you've got to have. You just can't afford to think that way at this point in the fantasy season. You've got to get a win this week to keep your hopes alive. Now, if you're cruising into the playoffs and you're loaded and you've got something else you can drop and you can get Darius Slayton at a discount because other folks are going to discount him because they're dealing with bye weeks, then go ahead. And I would actually look at my league mates who I know are in the playoff race, and I would look and see what their rosters look like, and see, okay, who are the guys and then how much do they still have in blind bid dollars, how much do I think that they could really put on a guy like Slayton, and then I would go from there.
The previous 3 weeks, he only had 10 total targets. So it's not like he was really emerging anywhere. This is really out of the blue. Okay, in Green Bay, it's Davante Adams and nobody else. We touched on this last week, but a guy we spoke of very highly in the preseason was MVS. He only played 11 snaps, Dwayne, this week. And to me, it looks like our favorite guy, Lazard, Alan Lazard, is now the 3 behind Adams and Allison.
Yeah, that's the way it looks. And again, I don't know with MVS because he continues to be on the injury report, is limited all week. And then they pull him off the report at the end of the week. So, different teams handle that differently, but my gut tells me that he's still playing with an injury. So yeah, I mean, but at this point, honestly, I don't want to own any Packers receivers outside of Davante Adams. It's not a big deal to me. Jay Sternberger did come back. He played 22% of the snaps. He only ran a route, though, on 3% of the dropbacks. So he's a guy that, they could try to get a little bit more involved. He's a guy that could also play the slot. But Geronimo Allison is really the 2 at this point. He's his routes per drop back over the last 3 weeks, 71%, 59%, and 72%. So that's still not great. They're kind of rotating him and Lazard and Kumaro. And then if all of a sudden MVS gets back healthier, it's just kind of a train wreck. This is an offense
the ball so much.
Yeah, that exactly. You never know which games, they've got to be in a situation where, they're really being forced to pass the ball more for those kind of percentages to really play out in any kind of way that's going to be of value to you in fantasy. Now, I will say with Lazard, he's definitely got something going with Aaron Rodgers. And you talked about this several weeks back whenever he had the big game. I can't remember if it was Thursday night or Monday night. I think it was a Thursday night game.
I think it was a Thursday nighter.
But he has been the second. He has been second in targets 2 of the last 3 weeks. So he's had 15%, 11%, and 21%. And so, obviously Adams is at 31 and 34, but Lazard has been, even though he's not playing as many snaps, he's not running as many routes. He's a guy that we're seeing that chemistry, with Aaron Rodgers. And you even talked about the post-game presser, right? When he talked about how hard he saw Lazard working, in the meetings, he's been around the guy, he likes him. That, those comments, they're playing out, because for the amount of time Lazard's playing, you wouldn't expect to see him have as many of the targets. Now, the thing that they're doing with him, Drake, is they're using him now more to stretch the field. His average depth of target over the last 2 weeks, 18.3 and 15.3. So remember, that's really where Marquise Valdes-Scantling was working before. Right. So now they're using Lazard in that kind of role. So if you're in a DFS kind of punt situation, where you want a guy for cheap that could hit a home run, could hit a touchdown pass, maybe you're stacking Aaron Rodgers with Adams, and you don't have a ton of, cash left in your lineup, then Lazard's a guy that you could plug in, and you're doubling up on the Packers receivers. He'd be the other one I'd go after in a GPP type scenario, just because he's getting the higher leverage, options.
Again, they're on bye this week, but if you're looking down the road, another team in the NFC North has a running back issue. I've never been so excited to play a guy coming off 10 attempts for 36 yards, but J.D. McKissack is it, and he is the man who's next in line if Ty Johnson cannot be cleared from this concussion. He's getting 7 targets. He looks pretty good when he's running the ball out there. He, to me, is like a jazzed up Theo Riddick. If you remember from these old Detroit days, but I think McKissack, if he's the guy, what kills you is they don't have Stafford. If Stafford was there, I'd be way more excited about McKissack, but hey, he's there. He's got a pulse. He's playing running back. Someone's going to start him this week. Why the hell not? Why not you?
Yeah, I'll be very interested to see, if Ty Johnson can't play. The Lions are going to do something. It is worth noting that Paul Perkins, didn't get anything last week. His snaps, they went up a little bit, 18%. His rushing attempts in the 2 previous weeks have been 12% and 15%. And that jumped to 26%. So they're obviously not real excited about using Perkins. So if they don't sign anyone else, then I think McKissick's a guy you can use. But my gut says they're going to do something else at running back this week. We'll have to sit and see how that plays out. But if they don't, you're right. 70% of the snaps, he ran around on 56% of the dropbacks. I think your description of him, from a Theo Riddick perspective, I don't know how much of a jazzed up version he is, but he's very similar to that type of a player, right?
He's Theo Riddick on some really good pre-workout.
So it's like you said, we need to see what's going to happen with Stafford. A lot of the guys that have the transverse process injury will come back after a week of rest and play, and so we could see Stafford play this week. We'll have to wait and see what the injury report says.
If you guys are looking to stream a defense out there, here's a couple of quick options for you. Oakland, they're playing Cincinnati this week. We know the Bengals are a dumpster fire. Bonus, they get the Jets next week, so check out the Raiders. Now, here's a fun one for you, Dwayne. You can either pick up the Jets against the Redskins or the Redskins against the Jets. Both suck. Both quarterbacks love turning the ball over. Which would you choose of those two hellacious options?
I would use the Jets just because you get to put them against the less experienced quarterback in Haskins. That would be my play.
And the Jags get Indianapolis possibly with a backup quarterback. If you're looking for some QB streamers, Nick Foles is going to return. You get Daniel Jones when he comes off bye. He's got a nice schedule coming up. And Derek Carr, the Raiders get to play the Bengals, and we know they can't stop anybody. So just a few things we're throwing out there at you if you're looking to stream. Dwayne, what is going on in Los Angeles with the Rams? They look awful. As someone tweeted, they look broken.
Yeah,
And
they are.
Numerous offensive line injuries. That's not helping.
Yeah, but I mean, we've been talking about it on this show, I think, since like week 3 or week 4. That the league has figured out the Rams and their offense. You can see how much a good running game does matter. Them not having it is clearly hurting them. Obviously, the offensive line issues. Yeah, they're not throwing to the backs that much. Only 10% total this last week, and that 10% was to Gurley, but nothing else to Malcolm Brown or Darrell Henderson. And Henderson's a guy that they had talked about trying to get involved in that way. And his role really just disappeared. He and Malcolm Brown, basically split, the role that was behind Gurley, and Gurley played 73% of the snaps. And the other issue that you have, if you're a fantasy owner, and we've talked about this multiple times with Gerald Everett now. You have to consider Gerald Everett's part of this. And so every week in the past, what it used to be is, because the Rams ran so much 11 personnel, 95% of their plays, and they really didn't throw to their tight ends, that each of the receivers could still be viable. Well, now they're starting to throw to the tight ends, and we saw it again, with Gerald Everett this past week, 27% of the targets, Drake.
Wow.
27%. He led the team, only 10% to Cooper Kupp. 24% to Robert Woods. Yeah, 0 points for Cooper Kupp. That's insane. But teams are going to start. And remember what we just talked about earlier. After 3 to 4 weeks, defenses are then studying that tape. If you watch that game, the Steelers said, we're taking Cooper Kupp away. And that's what they did. They doubled him a lot. They did a lot of different things with him. I saw quite a bit, of that game. I mean, Cooper Kupp, he's a great player, but he's a player that can be taken away, with the right defensive scheme. Of course, Minkah Fitzpatrick and how well the Steelers are playing on defense. It's not like everybody has that kind of talent. But yeah, when you've got, Josh Reynolds, Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, because Brandon Cooks is out right now with a concussion issue, and then you've got Gerald Everett, and they're willing to use them all. Not only is the offense broken, Drake, but one guy has to be left out each week. And now when the offense is playing bad, really 2 guys get left out. Used to, this was a top offense. We knew they were all going to play. So 3 guys could all be supported. Now, you've got 4 guys in a lesser offense, right? So the pie is now smaller, and you're trying to dice that up each week. You're going to have 2 players that are going to be the odd guys out from a receiving perspective between Everett, Woods, Kupp, and right now Josh Reynolds.
Yeah. And that line, like we said, is so banged up. If you can trade Todd Gurley before your deadline, I would be just helping pack the bags of Todd Gurley to get him off my roster and driving him to the airport. I don't want anything to do with that guy. All right, I want to ask you this for selfish reasons, and we got a listener that asked us about a Raider. So Darren Waller only has 7 catches over the last 3 weeks. That's concerning to me because I own Darren Waller in many, many leagues. We talked about the Rams getting figured out. Has Darren Waller and his presence in the Raider offense been figured out?
Well, teams are paying attention to him. I mean, if you look at, again, like,
can they stop?
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, if you look at it, Drake, here are Darren Waller's target percentages: 31%, 18, 41, 26%, 16%. Then you had a bye week. Then he came back 26%, 27%. So if you look at that 5-game stretch there of 41, 26, 16, 26, and 27%, what do we think the defense is going to try to take away? Now he's been at 6 and 16%. His underlying data is fine, Drake. His routes per drop back are great. His snaps are good. He's still a good player. He's an ascending talent. I think he's going to be fine. And you've just seen him have to go elsewhere over these last couple of weeks. Tyrell Williams has seen 13% and 16% of the targets. Hunter Renfrow, 23% and 16%. And then, they've been working Zay Jones in a little bit more, 13% and 10% of the targets. But Wallers are going to come back. And here's why. The only other guy that's really viable in the offense, I think the offense is it's 3 players. It's Josh Jacobs, it's Tyrell Williams, and it's Darren Waller. And the order I would put it in is Josh Jacobs, Darren Waller, and Tyrell Williams. And I think that's still going to hold true. It's just going to, you might have another week of it, but I have no problem putting Darren Waller in. I think a lot of it was to do was just really, defenses were really aiming to take him away. And we've seen that this thing goes in cycles. He'll rebound.
Any other players you want to touch on? I know you can go over to establishtherun.com and you can check out Dwain's utilization report. It's a really in-depth article that he puts out about players that are ascending and holding steady and kind of declining based on how teams are playing them. Go over to Establish the Run, use our promo code HUSTLE20 and save 20% off weekly, seasonal, and monthly packages. I know they've got all kinds of deals going on as the season winds down, but the content over there is fantastic. So you'd be crazy not to go to Establish the Run and check out all the fantastic content from Evan Silva and Evan Levitan. And you know what I noticed, Dwain, about our show?
What?
Because I love watching Establish the Show and all the good stuff that they do is that I'm a company man, you know, although I don't get paid by the company, but I'm a company man. We're the only podcast in America that doesn't wear hats.
Are we supposed to wear hats?
Every DFS podcast or fantasy podcast, it's just guys wearing hats. It's a backwards hat. Evan loves his Cubs hats. We're the only two guys that don't. Maybe we need like fantasy football hustle hats. Like nobody can see the balding spot in the back, thank God. So I'm looking okay on camera here in the front. But yeah, we're the only two guys that don't wear hats in the whole industry. We should change the show to like men without hats.
We shouldn't change though. If we're the only two, we'll just stick with it.
Our utilization report: 100% of podcasts without hats.
Yeah. As far as like any other guys, AJ Brown, 92% of the routes, ran a route on 92% of the dropbacks. So that's huge for him. Now, you did have Corey Davis out of the lineup, but he already posted an 80% the week before. He came up small, in the box score, despite seeing 21% of the targets, which was second to Jonnu Smith, who had 32%, who also came up small in the box score.
Yeah, they're just not throwing enough. Tannehill looks competent, but
they didn't have to this game, and you really thought they would. They've actually been throwing more. Their drop back percentage over the previous 2 weeks had been 64% and 72%, which is fine. And then in this game, they just got into a game of keep away, and the Chiefs couldn't stop Derrick Henry, and so they only had to drop back to pass 51% of the time. But had this game been the game we thought it might be, where they would need to, opt to pass on 70% of the plays, things might have turned out different. But AJ Brown's a guy that, we continue to, folks should continue to feel good about. Vance McDonald. Now, this is a team that doesn't run enough plays. The Steelers are only running 57 plays a game. I mean, that's not good, Drake. They're only running 2 plays per minute. They're dropping back to pass about 60% of the time. But if you're in a pinch at tight end, McDonald is playing over 90% of the snaps every week. He's running a route over 90% of the time. And his targets have gone up from 11 to 17 to 18%. So he's a guy that had been dropped in a lot of places. I do believe it's official that Bilal Powell is actually the backup to Le'Veon Bell, if anyone cares.
I do care about that. That's an interesting point because, they just lost Brian Winters, I believe, their center. I don't know if he's center or guard, whatever, but that's interesting because Bell's banged up, and at some point, I think they could shut him down because they're just so out of it. So for the playoffs, him or Ty Montgomery, they're going to become a thing.
That could be. Yeah, they absolutely could be. Traquan Smith was back this week. Drake jumped in with 82% of the snaps, ran a route on 83% of the dropbacks. That's second on the Saints. Irv Smith Jr., his trends just continue to go up. He ran a route on 71% of the plays this week. He's gone from 60 to 68 to 71%. His targets have gone from 12 to 16 to 19%. So they continue to use Kyle Rudolph in the red zone. Kyle Rudolph has 5 targets in the end zone over the last 2 weeks, Drake. He's got 6 on the season. So they are using Kyle Rudolph a lot more towards the red zone, but outside of that, it's really been more Irv Smith. Anybody else? Marcus Johnson. We don't even really know who he is, Drake, but we'll call his name out. Popped up for the Colts.
Former Eagles guy. We found that out.
Yeah, Deion. He's a speed guy. Ran a 4.36 40. He's out of the University of Texas. His broad jump was like, I don't know, it was like 11 feet something. It was. He's a spark guy. He's a Pete Carroll kind of guy. And guess what? He was on the Seahawks at one point. No surprise. But Marcus Johnson is the guy playing in Indianapolis on the outside, along with Zach Pascal at this point. Chester Rogers is playing inside, but Chester Rogers got bumped off the field, Drake, because finally, like last week, I think you asked this question. Don't they have to play Eric Ebron more at some point with all these guys hurt? So Drake, 80% of the routes per dropback. That's over 2 seasons. That's Eric Ebron's high.
Wow.
31% of the targets. So I think Ebron is in a situation where they're just going to have to go to him. Now, I mean, Brian Hoyer obviously sucks. We'll have to see what happens with Brissett. I know there's a chance that he's going to play this week. But yeah, looking at Ebron, he's a guy that if he's been dropped, he definitely could be having an increased role moving forward.
Head over to Fantasy Draft, sign up, use our promo code FFHustle. We'll gladly take your money and watch me cash this weekend when I win our listener league. We appreciate it, folks. Go over to Fighting Chance Fantasy, check out Ryan Hallam and all the good folks there. Read my work that I put up, fightingchancefantasy.com. Dwayne is at establishtheRun.com, MattWaldmanRSP.com, and footballguys.com. He does a fantastic podcast with Jay Moyer. You guys put it out, bi-weekly now?
Yes, every other week.
The RSP Data and Film Room?
The RSP Fantasy Film and Data podcast.
Matt Waldman's going to show up at my house and punch me in the face. Great show, though. Check those guys out. Jay Moyer does really good stuff. If you're into film and why guys do certain things. I was actually at the bar, and I pulled up his work on Miles Sanders and how Sanders kind of misses some holes early in the year and all that. And I was showing my buddies because they're like, why is Jordan Howard play so much? I'm like, wow, funny you say that. I know this guy, and
I know a guy.
And I looked smart. I know a guy who does a podcast in the back of a car, and he'll watch all the smart stuff he can do. But follow Jay. He's a really smart guy. That's about it, man. Dwayne, anything else? Good to go?
No, man. I think we hit a lot of great stuff, though.
Yeah, man. Go out, everybody. Crack a beer. Put in your J.D. McKissack and Brian Hill bids. Until then, folks, it'll be week 12 next week. Never get out hustled. The road to the playoffs goes through this show, the Fantasy Football Hustle. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.